Hi everyone. We're going to try another watercolor here. This one in particular is going to be The Old Pilgrim. It's a photograph I took down in North Carolina. And remember, I always take photographs specifically to paint from. So in a lot of cases, my photographs are ready to go just as they are. Now sometimes I'll combine photographs depending on the wildlife photos that I may involve a animal with a background and then have various images even of the animal itself to try and help me piece together how much information I need to create the painting itself. This one is going to be pretty much straightforward, but it'll be a little bit more intense with the reflection. I have it just penciled out here lightly because what I want to do is just try to do as much as I can while I paint and not have a real elaborate drawing that I like to go and paint and see what happens as I paint. And then I may refine other things here and there that might stray away from the photograph just a little bit. What that will do is just give me the chance to see what will happen with the paints, and then that way I could more or less be a little bit more spontaneous instead of duplicating the photograph exactly. Now what I'll do is I'll stop here and just show you the photograph, a full-size screen, just to give you a rough idea what we're in for, and then I will actually start giving it some preliminary washes. This is the photo we'll be working from, just to give you a really good up-close detailed look at it. But more importantly, you'll probably recognize this photo. This is the exact same photo that I used for the 10-minute tutorial of a photo into a watercolor using Rebel 6 Pro. That tutorial worked out pretty well, and it's a very easy way to create a watercolor look with a photograph. But this time we're going to take this same photo and make it into a traditional watercolor, just using traditional watercolors. But what we want to go over first is just how much detail the water has in this particular photo, and that is only because of the very subtle movement of the water. It's just enough to really just ripple and distort the reflection, but most of the detail is still all there from the subtle details and color changes in the boat itself. We're going to put some of that in, but not all of it, just enough to make it look like a very strong rendering of a reflection, but it doesn't have to be this critical. Let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to paint this out in traditional watercolors. Okay, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to probably start in this back here just to give it some washes. I think what I'll do is mix some cobalt violet and some cerulean blue. Looks like some really nice colors would work there. And then some of these are going to be just a real deep turquoise blue, cerulean blues, there may be a tinge of green in them, and then the reflections are going to get pretty deep. Water is always much darker than what it is reflecting because it's absorbing the light. Photographically, you could figure that out in a hurry if you start photographing quite a bit. But this one, the burnt siennas and all the rust spots, I will definitely do that while it's wet on wet and let the paint bleed out a little bit. Let's give it some preliminary washes here and just see. And again, I'm going to go real light just to work in some colors. And I have the buckets of water right here to the left of the palette, so it's very convenient for me as I work. And then I'm going to even take some water. And again, this is going to be real light. And if I want, I can also then just kind of paint over everything if I know it's going to be darker than the color I'm using now. And then again, that will also help me with my color unity. I'll whiff that bristle out later after it dries. And I want to try and get some dry brush here too, just to actually give it very uneven surface for the paint and what have you. Now, if my color is going so dark over here, it really wouldn't matter too much whether I painted this particular color over these types of areas at all, because that is going to go so dark that you very well may need, not see these very light washes to begin with. But I can put that color in this part of anywhere where there's whites going down into the real deep blues down in here. So what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of that. And we're going to take it over to the other side of the boat too. And then just to get started, we'll get into some speed painting here too. I'm going to have to do this fairly fast. What I'll do, I want to leave, I think this right in here, almost pure white. And everything here is darker. Then what I'll do is, while it's wet, we're going to take some straight water and take that almost into just clean water, and that's it. I'll even have a Kleenex ready that if I put a little bit too much paint down, I'm going to get some burnt sienna ready. And this is real light again, so if some of these hard edges stay, that's okay. And this is just a preliminary of the burnt sienna as I'll go back in with much more intense colors as it dries. And again, we could take the pencil marks out later if they're still there too much. I try to go back over them well before I start painting, and then I roll it over with a kneaded eraser just to try and pick up as much of the lead as I can. Okay, we can let that bleed out a little bit. I'll put a little wee bit more intense color there. And now I could go back to my cobalt violet and cerulean blue. There's a hard shadow under that board there. I'll do that later. And I think I'll pull out some of those white reflected lines from the water reflecting back up, because they're even reflecting back into the shadowed areas. So they are coming from a different direction than our light source. So they could be handled differently if we want them to. I have to wait till this completely dries before I put that board in, because that runner board here, I would definitely want it to be nice and fairly straight and not bleed too much. I'm going to go with a cobalt turquoise and the green. That Windsor green with cobalt turquoise will make it a good bit darker. And we're going to put our gold in there too. Okay. Okay, I'm going to let that dry out a little bit now. And then we'll start blocking in some more details, start putting in some different areas. And we'll get some speed painting done now. Blocking in some of the preliminary washes, this is the time I will use the colors together if I need soft edges, just to blend multiple colors together. But in some cases, I really like a snappy, clean color that's almost pure and unmixed at all. My opinion, that is what watercolors are all about, water and color. Now, just working in with the dry areas of the paper, I'll bounce around here and there on the painting just so I could go back into a dry paper area if I need to. This way I could put down color and then know that I'll have straight edges if I need them. If I have to wet the paper or mist it or just put down a preliminary light wash before I add in new colors to get soft edges, then that's what I'll do also. Keep in mind that even though my drawing table is on about a 30-degree angle, I could wet specific areas of the paper and then drop the paint at the bottom of that wet area, and the paint will still draw upwards and soften to a specific edge. This I do on the side of the boat. That works rather well. I don't have to turn the painting upside down or anything like that to get it to flow that much. Now, if I want it to flow quite a bit or really run with paint and water, then I would have to turn the painting upside down. But in this particular painting, that is not called for, that I don't need that dramatic of a wet wash. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. Now, the water is still fairly light overall. And remember, it should be a little bit darker than the boat itself. And I have to also take this area down here a little bit darker. And then I'll finish the nameplates. I'm going to keep this a little bit more loose up in here, just to not pull too much attention way up to the edge of the painting. And then once I get the blue sky real dark, it's going to make this area look that much more light. This area right in here could even get a little bit more dark too. But there's areas that I could keep on taking down. But what I'll do is I'll take everything down in stages as to what I want to leave light and make even more dark. And then once we get everything pretty well finished, then I may very well take the white gesso back over some of these areas to give that water reflected light back up into the shadowed areas and on the darker areas. But I don't want to do that till very last because that will seal the paper and that will limit me as to what I could change after that. So that will be very last. And then I might even erase a little bit of the pencil lines, but I'm not going to get too concerned about that till the very end to just see what's left, because the darker colors will cover over the pencil lines until then. Let's go ahead and finish this painting up completely in speed painting, and then we'll have our final thoughts at the end just to see how this one turns out. Just continuing on with some of the subtle basic details in the back and top of the boat, where there's plastic pipes again and some ropes and inner boards and the wharf itself. I'll just start roughing in some of the base coats and then either take dry brush or additional darker colors over top of them. Again, I'm just bouncing around the painting, that if I need to work with dry paper, then I'll work wherever I know there's dry paper and then go back to areas once they've dried to continue on, or actually just wet specific areas for multiple color mixes. The paper itself and then also the water content on it is very critical and traditional. If your timing is wrong or it's a little bit off, you may end up with a color mix or even edges or soft edges or a hard edge of different shapes and configurations that you may not want. And that will all be due to the dampness of the paper. Working with more colors and just fine-tuning the very subtle reflections of the barely moving water. I'm just trying to rough in some of the shapes of where I'm going to have my more dominant reflections at. Working with the darker blues, I'm still trying to take the blue sky reflection in the water darker and darker, and then that will also indirectly lighten up the rest. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, I think I'm going to call this painting quits, and just to give a rough idea of how something like this could compare to our 10-minute watercolor done from a photograph. Now there, all I did was warp the photograph out of shape in Rebel 6 and then let the water distort the photo. Now that is quite different from this, but just to show you the difference between a 10-minute watercolor and roughly a 10-hour watercolor, it'll give us a rough idea of what we're going to be in for with traditional. Now I have plans of doing a lot more traditional watercolors, digital watercolors, traditional acrylics, And then I've even been asked to do some photographs as far as especially as to how I take my references, and then also just photographing in the field in general. So those are yet to come. And then that way we'll just touch on photographs because, again, keep in mind, I originally got into photography to have my own references to paint from. And I feel that's very important only because a lot of my photographs, when I take them, I have the painting in mind when I'm taking the photo. So in most cases, the photo is ready to go right as it is. And that is the kind of painting I want, depending on what I have available at the time. So in other words, if it's lighting, if it's chopping off something I would not want in the picture or painting, then that is what I'm considering at the time. So there's a lot of thought and variables that go in to what a final photograph then painting may look like. But for me, also, I may combine several photographs to create one final painting also. But in this case, I just took the exact same photo that we used for the 10-minute watercolor and did just a quick traditional watercolor out of it. So we'll call this one closed. And then again, until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.